Why Japan allowed trade only with the Dutch? Japan had a well-known reputation for being a closed country prior to the arrival of an American navy. The trade with the outside world was tightly restricted, and anyone who entered the country illegally was subject to the death penalty. This was the situation in the country. The Dutch were nonetheless allowed to engage in commerce there, despite the fact that they were hostile against everything that was foreign. This brings up the issue that is self-evident. Why? Why was it that only Dutch merchants were allowed to operate out of the country? In the middle of the 16th century, a group of Portuguese merchants arrived in Japan from China. This was the first time that Europeans traveled to Japan. It turned out to be a fortuitous turn of events since shortly after this, Japan and China stopped trading with one another as a result of a disagreement. The Portuguese came to the conclusion that they might make a significant amount of money by acting as intermediaries. In addition to this, they came to the realization that this brand new land was dealing with a glaring absence of Jesus. Although Japan had a single emperor at this point in time, the country was decentralized, with various regional lords competing with one another for power in order to gain an advantage over their neighbors. Furthermore, for them, Christianity, or at the very least, having positive contacts with Christians, brought with it a significant benefit: firearms. The Portuguese were eager to ensure that the weaponry they sold to the Japanese was distributed to the Christians first. They sold firearms to the Japanese. The threat that Christianity posed to Japanese culture, tradition, and the dominance of other aristocratic Japanese houses was therefore centered on Christianity. Following the conclusion of a civil war that resulted in the foundation of the Tokugawa shogunate, the shoguns came to the conclusion that Christianity needed to be addressed. This occurred at the beginning of the 17th century. In order to accomplish this, the first step that they took was to limit their trade with Christians to Nagasaki. This made it much simpler for them to keep an eye on them. The Portuguese, on the other hand, continued to smuggle missionaries into Japan, and following a Christian uprising, the government made the religion completely illegal. In an effort to show their appreciation to the central government, the Dutch had supported the government with weapons and support throughout this uprising. Now, you might be thinking that it was strange for the Dutch Tweede Heathen government to take a stance against Christians. However, there are two reasons for this. First, those individuals were Catholics, and hence, to the Dutch Protestants, they were the incorrect Christians. And second, money. After the revolt, the shogunate expressed gratitude to the Dutch East India Company for its assistance, and as a result, they granted the company the exclusive right to conduct business through Nagasaki. It was done under three different situations. The first was that the Dutch had unquestioningly complied with the norms that were set down by the government. Second, they reached an agreement that they would never make an attempt to convert the Japanese to faith in Christianity. However, the third reason was that the Dutch were required to send a delegation to Edo on an annual basis. The purpose of this was to not only reaffirm their commitment, but also to provide the government with an update on the situation in countries such as China and Korea, in the event that it was something that they required information on. There were other nations that attempted to open up trade, but the Japanese either did not know them and therefore had to rely on what the Dutch had to say about them, or in the case of the English, they were aware of their affiliation with the Portuguese and therefore immediately told them to go elsewhere. Even if the Dutch were granted a monopoly on trade, this does not imply that the two countries had a positive relationship with one another. Although the Japanese were content to engage in commercial transactions with the Dutch East India Company, they were adamant about avoiding any interaction with the Dutch Republic and refused to establish diplomatic ties with them. Furthermore, even after the Dutch East India Company was succeeded by the Dutch East Indies Colony, the Japanese were still eager to restrict their relationship with the Dutch to merely one of commerce. In 1853, the Dutch at Nagasaki warned the shogunate of an American armada that was coming to force Japan to open trade. This was to the shogunate's great detriment, as the American armada was moving toward Japan. Due to the fact that the shogun was under the impression that this was a fabrication designed to sell Japan military equipment that it did not require, this warning was swiftly disregarded. Thank you for following this video. I invite you to subscribe to this channel to keep up to date with the next super interesting videos that will be released. Leave a like and a comment below, also with requests on what topics you would like me to talk about. See you in the next video!